Okay, our scripture reading today is Acts 28, verse 2. So if you want to join me in that, it's reading from the New King James Bible, and it says, Acts 28, verse 2 says, And the natives showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and made us all welcome because of the rain that was falling and because of the cold. Our sermon today is with Robert.
Thank you. Alan, thank you very much for playing the piano today. I came in when the participants came in through the door and I saw Alan, and I was greatly relieved. I didn't think he was going to be here today. And it's nice to see him. It's also good to see each of you. Some of you I haven't seen for a day or two, and I'm glad you're here. Me feel good. I hope that you can get the message that I hope I put into this sermon. There's something, in the mornings, I spend about 10 minutes watching the morning news on TV. That's all the time I have for it. I might do more, but that's all I've got. And they do the weather, and I want to see if it's any different at their house than it is at mine. And then they do the traffic report, which doesn't do me any good because I'm not going downtown Chicago anyway. But the guy who does this on Channel 2, he ends everything up, says, and let's be nice to you. I think that's why I watch it. Because being kind, or as he says, nice to each other, is probably one of the things I miss in my daily life. Because we all aren't kind enough. We all, that's me, are not kind enough. I had this little story that I gleaned from the internet about kindness. And I think I chose it because the first part of the story, I had a similar experience. Let me tell you, it happened in the South, and it happened to a preacher. He was a good Christian man, and he bought a really nice home with a big couple acres of lawn to go with it. I don't want to mow that for him, but it was nice for him to buy that. Something he wanted. One day after the closing, he had the furniture moved in. And the next day, he moved in himself. And as he arrived, he looked out over the lawn that he had to mow. And he looked out over the lawn, and there was his neighbor running across the lawn just as hard as he could come. You know, that neighbor, the little chubby guy that's running just as hard as he can. And when he got caught up with this man who was a pastor, he said to him, "Did you just buy this property?" The pastor said, "Yes, I did." And he says, "Well, just prepare yourself for a lawsuit, because that's what you just bought for yourself. That fence is 7 feet over the line into my property, and I aim to have every foot that I own." Pastor looked at him, and this was an opportunity to get angry. This happened to me not too long ago, too many years. I bought a piece of property, I went there, and the next door neighbor said, "That fence is in the wrong place. 7 foot of your property is mine." I didn't respond the same way this guy did. I said, "Well, okay, we'll just get a survey and see whose it is." Pastor didn't say that, didn't worry about that. He said, "Well, I bought the property in good faith, but I can see I can trust you, that you are not going to lead me wrong. You may have that 7 feet. I'll have the fence moved immediately. The neighbor said, "Whoa, who are you?" "No way I'm making a lawsuit, and I don't want the 7 feet. Any man who is as kind as you are deserves every bit of it." Our lives, you and I, we greatly underestimate the power of being kind. Everybody here, if I were to talk to you personally, you would say, "I'm kind." Are you kind enough? Are you kind often enough? History that we may study, almost everybody recognizes the value of kindness. It is a universal virtue that everybody wants and values in everybody else. It's the natural man who can sometimes be very kind. Well, who's the natural man? He's the man who isn't claiming to be a child of the King. He isn't claiming to have a relationship with Christ, but he can still be kind. It's a common virtue. If the non-Christian can be kind, what does that say about you and I when we aren't kind? The scripture text this morning, it was in Acts 28:2. Paul and his companions, I started to say buddies, but I doubt they were. They were all prisoners, right? His companions were on this boat that got in a storm and was shipwrecked, and they finally made it ashore onto this island. I believe it was Malta. And the people there who didn't know anything about them except they were prisoners made a fire, fixed wood, get them warm and dry, and Paul recognized they showed unusual kindness. A pagan people showing Paul and the others great kindness. A famous atheist and philosopher, Bertrand Russell, wrote a book. The title of his book was "Why I Am Not a Christian." He sold a lot of those books. People were very curious as to why he was not a Christian. He surprised the world when they got the book and started reading. He said in his book that the key to a stable world, now this is an atheist guy, right? And he says the key to a stable world is Christian kindness. What a thing for this atheist philosopher to say. Well, I'll say one thing. He recognizes the truth when it's shown to him. He says, if you feel that this is so, you have a motive for your existence. You have a guide for your actions, a reason for courage, and an imperative, a command necessary for intellectual honesty. Here's a non-Christian praising the value of kindness. The impact of it can have on all of you. Paul writes in Ephesians 4:31, "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away, and be kind to one another. I am struck by the importance to Paul of that one word. After saying, don't be like this and this and this, he says, be kind. The importance of that. Being kind is the opposite of all those negatives. You know, bitterness, wrath, anger. Kindness covers it all. Being polite, courteous, tolerant, and thoughtful. Those are all ways to show kindness. Peter puts that virtue right up there with the key virtue of Christian faith. 2 Peter 1:7, he writes, add to godliness kindness, and to kindness add love. That all sounds nice, smooth, great. Who can argue with the value of being kind? What is it? Just what is kindness? You all have some idea already. I came up with my own definition. Kindness is giving to others the pleasure you desire for yourself. You like to be treated well. You like to be treated with respect. You like to be treated with courtesy. Kindness, doing all of those things for everyone. During World War I, a fellow by the name of Marshal Foch, the French commander in the military there, was approached by an American. And in the context of what is said in the story, it says, a noisy Westerner. And this fellow goes up to this French commander, and he says, you French think you've got it made. You're super polite, and you're proud of your politeness to everyone. There's nothing in that politeness but wind. Marshall stepped back and waited a moment and said, there's nothing in a tire but wind, but it sure makes the ride smooth. Many would think that kindness is just superficial. It's something that many of us just put on like a coat. Underneath, we're not really that way, but we want to show the world we are. And so, some Christians don't think of kindness as being too important because it's superficial. Well, let me ask. Is it superficial to wash your face? Yes, it is. Is it superficial to paint your house? It's on the surface, right? Is it superficial to wear clothes? Well, they're pretty important, but they are just on the surface. There are a lot of superficial things that we do and we consider very important. But there's something we're adding on. When I was 18, I bought my first car. 1948 Ford. Somebody asked me about, well, was it this special? No, it was just an ordinary four-door, that anybody would have. But, I bought it for $50. But, of course, $50 when I was 18 was a large sum of money. I really enjoyed that car. I called up all my buddies, and I stopped by their houses and picked them up, and we went for rides. Everything seemed fantastic. I didn't know any better. I could have, I should have. Maybe my dad told me, but I didn't listen. I was too enthralled with owning this car. And I took my buddies out for a ride. I probably had it for 2 weeks. And we're going down the road. Boom! The engine's now on fire. It threw a rod through the crankcase. Now, the reason it threw a rod through the crankcase is I thought nothing of checking the oil. So after a while, if those bearings don't have oil, they're gone, aren't they? You know that on those bearings, the oil is a finitely small surface on the bearing, in the surface. It's very superficial. Yet, it kept the car going as long as it lasted. I'd like to suggest that kindness is the oil in our lives. It's what keeps things going. And we would be wise, take an inventory, and check the oil in our lives. You see, if we possess an adequate supply of kindness, it makes our lives run smooth. If not, we need to add. We need to add. We need to add the lubricant of kindness to our lives. Get yourself prepared to live in a world where friction frequently your enemy. Friction, whether it's the bearings in my car or friction between each of us, it'll cause the car to quit running. So we need the oil, the lubricant of kindness to keep us going. Jesus told his disciples and others to meet life's frictions with kindness, courtesy, and politeness. There was many a rough ride ahead for them. I read about, and most of you know the name, Napoleon, right? He was an extremely great general, a world conqueror, even though some thought he was the Antichrist, the opposite of Jesus. Thought he was a terrible man. However, his troops would go into battle and die for him. He had a very personal relationship with each of his soldiers. Before he would be meeting the soldiers, he would call the commander in. He would ask the commander about a soldier. What is his name? Who are his parents? Where do they live? And on the day that he would review the troops, he would take that information and he would go up to one of the troops and address him by name. Harry, how are your parents doing? I know they're getting up in age. How are they doing? And how are the crops doing over there in Lebanon? Those men put their lives on the line for Napoleon. Every soldier who fought for him, believed that he knew each of them personally and cared about them and their family. This public expression of his kindness may have been just something he did. It may have been something that he wasn't really honest about. It could have been, or maybe it was just good psychology. It doesn't matter. There's power in kindness. And the Christian has an obligation to use this power for the kingdom of God. You may have heard the expression, you can catch more flies with honey than vinegar. I'm sure you've heard that, haven't you? I'm not into catching flies. There are enough around already. But it works with people too. Kindness can bring peace and reconciliation where all else fails. Criticism tends to compel people to justify their bad behavior. but compliments reinforce people's desire. This is just good psychology for non-Christians. The difference is nobody is commanding them to be kind. However, you have been commanded by Jesus. Kind. You don't have the option of using just good psychology. It is your responsibility as a Christian to be kind. To tell the world, to let them know that kindness is an expression of God's nature. To be an example for Christ demands kindness. The experiences of our lives put us in positions where we show the kindness of being a follower of Jesus. Kindness is important in all aspects of your life. All of us have been told to develop a long-suffering attitude. What does that mean? It means to put up with people, doesn't it? Well, long-suffering puts up with people. But kindness puts oneself out for people. The prodigal son's father, long-suffering. The prodigal son came to him, asked for his share of the family's goods, and left and brought dishonor on the family. Even though he went to a far land, don't think Dad didn't know what was going on. But Dad was long-suffering. However, the prodigal son came back, and Dad told the servants, "Let's have a big party. Let's have a feast. My son who was dead is now alive and has come home." That was kindness, because the son did not deserve any. That was kindness. Sometimes you and I, as Christians, feel proud that they can tolerate the sinner. You ever think of yourself as tolerating sinners? I saw one or two heads go, "Yeah, I've been there." Well, I have too. And when I tolerate a sinner, it makes me think to myself, I'm so glad I've got Jesus in my life, because I can tolerate. You know what? Jesus doesn't tolerate sinners. He shows them kindness, loves them. They are part of his family as much as you are. The things that he does for you, Jesus has done for the sinners also. In Luke, I want to paraphrase this a little bit, 6:35, be kind to your enemy. Do good to them. Lend to them without expecting to get anything back. Boy, that's hard for me. Then your reward will be great, and you will be the sons of the Most High. And here's why I read that. Here's why I read all of that. This one last phrase. Because Jesus is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. Did you catch that? Jesus is kind to the ungrateful and wicked. He makes the sun to shine on both of us. And when it rains on everybody. The just as well as the unjust. He does not withhold any of his blessings of creation and his patience from those who are not king. You understand what I said? You are here, and I'm going to expect that everyone here is seeking to be united with Christ, with Jesus. You want to go to heaven. You want to be with him. But Jesus cares as much for the people out there who don't feel the same. He's just as kind to them. He gives them the sunshine and the rain. He's given them life. And He's just as interested in their well-being as He is in mine. Now, some of you may know the name of Dwight L. Moody. Anybody heard that name before? John, you went to Indiana Academy. Did you know that Dwight L. Moody went to Indiana Academy? He was a couple years behind me. And I don't know, his parents really must have loved this evangelist named Dwight L. Moody. He started the Moody Institute in downtown Chicago. He was quite a minister, quite a theologian. It was his conviction that the loving kindness of God is what the world most needs to hear. Because people who do not feel love believe that they are not loved and they flee from righteousness. They run from God. If I could only make men understand the real meaning of the words of the Apostle John, God is love. If you really make people believe that God loves them, we would find them crowding into the kingdom of heaven. The trouble is, men think that God hates them. I'll finish the phrase in just a minute. Why do you think somebody thinks God hates them? Well, I'll tell you why. Because in your actions, and maybe your words, but in our actions, if you're not one of us, you're not ready to go to heaven. You're not like that, but I certainly have heard that. The trouble is that people think God hates them. So they are all the time running away from God. We sometimes get too used to hearing the stories from the Bible. We forget how radical they sometimes are. There's the story of Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well. That's a classical story of kindness. But how far did Jesus go out on a limb to be kind to that woman? Well, I have read that for a Hebrew man to speak to his wife or his mother in public was not to be done. Just didn't do that. Frowned upon. Much less to speak to a stranger. And this stranger was in a public place and had a reputation. Jesus took the risk of taking on the dismay of all of the Israelites, especially the men around him, and he would be seen just like this woman who had the bad reputation. But he risked it anyway. And what did he do? He showed the woman kindness. That makes this one of the greatest stories in the Bible. Jesus spoke to someone who didn't earn his kindness, someone who didn't deserve it. If we are only supposed to give kindness to people who deserve it, we probably aren't going to be giving it to anyone at all. Many people were rejected in Jesus' time, but Jesus did not reject them. I'll give you an example. Zacchaeus. Now, most of you probably wouldn't even know who Zacchaeus was if you hadn't been in the kindergarten and sang the song. You know it. Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he. He climbed up in the sycamore tree. You got the song. if I didn't have that, I wouldn't know much about him, except that he was a tax collector. And what did Jesus say when he walked under that sycamore tree? Zacchaeus, you come down. I'm going to your house today. Now, that doesn't seem so bad to me today, but if Zacchaeus was a drug dealer and I wanted to go to his house for lunch, I don't think you would think too well of that situation. Maybe I'm a drug dealer too. That's where Jesus was when he said, Zacchaeus, you come down. I'm going to your house today. Zacchaeus could have been a drug dealer. The worst of the worst, Jesus was showing him kindness. You want to have a great impact on someone's life? Someone who doesn't really earn it, who hasn't shown that they deserve your kindness? You want a big impact. I read a story, and I'm using it because it happened in my hometown. In Indianapolis, there was a prison for women. When I read this story, I wasn't sure that it was true, because I'd never heard of it. But I suppose I wasn't looking for a woman's prison when I lived as a boy. Anyway, there was a woman in there who had been there for 30 years. She was known as the terror of the jail. She was a tough, wicked person. And a Christian woman became the warden of that prison. I knew a man who was a guard at a prison. I just could not figure out how a Seventh-day Adventist could be a prison guard. And I read this story, I wondered, how could a Christian be a warden of a prison be considered a Christian? But I guess it's all possible, isn't it? And this woman, the Christian woman, became acquainted with each of her inmates, and when she heard about this one, she had her brought to the office. And the guards brought this woman, the terror of the prison, into the warden's office in chains. Chains, mind you, all shackled. And the warden immediately said, take those chains off. Kind of reminiscent of what Jesus has done for us, right? Moved our chains of sin. Well, the guard said, oh my goodness, don't you know who this is? She is the terror of the prison. You cannot trust her. She will not do as she's supposed to do. The warden said, take the chains off anyway. And reluctantly the guards did. And the woman is kind of kneeling on the floor with her chains off, not knowing what's happening to her, what's about to happen. And the warden walked over to her and put her arms around her shoulders and lifted her up. The prisoner said, do you think that I could be better? Do you really believe, do you think that I could be better? You know, that's where most of us are, isn't it? We really are saying to Jesus, do you really believe that I could be better than I am? And the warden said yes. Nobody ever dreamed she could be better, that she would be different than she was. She was labeled as the worst of the worst. And one person showing kindness gave her hope that she could be. 6 months later, baptized. All because one person believed in her and showed her kindness. A year later, her reputation was not the terror of the jail. Her reputation was the angel. Kindness brought her into God's kingdom. What all the condemnation of 70 years could not do, kindness did in 6 months. You know, it's wonderful to hear stories where kind love changed somebody. But I'm going to tell you what will never change anything. Pointing out the error of their way. Condemning someone will never change. Kindness that will bring people into God's kingdom, that will fill the pews. Kindness is the only. Jesus went through his life being kind. He turned funerals into festivals and water into wine. I read this, and it had to be in my sermon, so here it is. He did not ask whether what he did pay off or not. I saw 2 people today on the corner panhandling for money. They always have some sign. I got a family of 5 and they're starving. I've been down on my luck for 25 years. Whatever it is. And I'll tell you, my first thought is, they'll never change. That's not what Jesus thinks. He knows can. He was kind because he loved. That's Jesus. He wasn't kind because he wanted a certain outcome. Love doesn't say, kindness doesn't say, if I'm kind to you, you'll do such and such. That's not the way it works. Some Christians, including myself, go through life waiting for a spectacular chance. You know, a chance to show kindness. One that'll make a difference. You know, I can show kindness to you. I'll shake your hand on the way out. I can say nice things about you. You've got really nice dress on today. I can be kind about all kinds of things. You know, will it make a difference? I'm looking for that spectacular. You know, when I'm kind, suddenly come the primary evangelistic pastor in the whole country and win hundreds of souls. It doesn't work like that. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Anybody hear that name before? Yes? High school, right? You probably had to read some of his stuff. After I read stuff in high school, I don't think I read anything again. He said, and I think this is something for me to take into heart, you can never do a kindness too soon. You never know how soon it will be. I'm going to tell a story. If I cry, forgive me. Some construction workers were building a high-rise building across the street from a hospital. You know who builds high-rise buildings, right? Iron workers. The guys who walk those beams and rivet more of them together and sometimes fall. I would lose my balance for sure. When I was 8 or 10 years old, I could walk it. But when I'm 80 years old, I don't think I will stay on it very long. But these are the guys, the rough, burly guys, that made up this construction crew. They don't have time to fool around with it. Life is too short. Staying on the beam is too important. As they were working on the 3rd floor, they noticed a little girl standing in the 3rd floor window of the hospital across the street, watching. She seemed to be there every day, watching them work. One day they looked, and she was holding up some poster board The poster board had been written on it with a marker by her. Hi, my name is Lisa. What's your name? Now you can imagine these guys can't be fooled around with something like that. They're too busy. The next day, one of the workers, poster board and markers. And everyone on the crew wrote their names. My name is Bill. My name is Bob. My name is Harry. And the last thing they wrote, how old are you? The next day, Lisa held up a sign that said, I'm 7 years old. This went on for several days, exchanging pleasantries. You know, the kind we always do. I might not ask you how old you are, Mary. It's considered inappropriate. However, this is the kind of conversation they had, getting acquainted. The story told me several days. I don't know if it was a week, 3 weeks. It doesn't matter. One day, they noticed that Lisa wasn't at her. So at break time, one of the men called the hospital and asked for the third-floor nurse. He asked if she could tell him anything at all about Lisa. The nurse said that Lisa had taken a turn for the worse and was now in intensive care. The guys pooled their money. One of them went out and bought flowers. Another bought a card that they all signed. Another one bought some balloons, and the next day, on their break, I think it went a little long, by the way, they went to the hospital, intensive care, and asked if they could give these things to Lisa. The nurse, lo and behold, allowed them in. All 6 of them came in with their balloons and their flowers and their cards, and they were allowed to give it to Lisa. I'm going to stop right here. That's kindness we didn't expect of those guys. Several more days passed, and they brought her cards, balloons, almost every day. Flowers. One day, while they were working, someone put up a sign in Lisa's window. Lisa passed away last night. And that brings me back to this one phrase, that sentence I read to you from Ralph Waldo Emerson. You can never do a kindness too soon, for you never know how soon it will be too late. The greatest need in this world is not for gifted people. I really enjoy your trumpet solo. We don't need more trumpet soloists. Hannah sang last week, and I loved it. We don't really need more of it. What we need is people who are kind. If you want to make a difference in this world, to soothe the friction and make everybody's transition through life smoother and easier, learn to. It is not something that is an option. You are a follower of Jesus, commanded